Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Thanks for joining us here today. One of the things that's really well documented in this community is the history and the lore of node.js, the project. Its rapid growth, who started it, when it started, everyone knows that story. I think what's a little less well known is Node.js Foundation. And what is the foundation? When did it start? So we've assembled some panelists here today who are representatives of the Node.js Foundation Board of Directors. I'm Sarah Conway. I work for the Linux Foundation, working very closely on the Node.js Foundation project. And we're going to invite our panelists today to discuss the start, the rise, the purpose of the foundation. So with that, I'd like to just let them all do some brief introductions. Charlie, do you want to start us off?
Hi, I'm Charlie Robbins. I work at GoDaddy. I formerly ran a startup that was pretty involved in Node in the early days, and I am on for the gold level.
Hi, I'm Denise Cooper. I'm the chair of the foundation again this year. I work for PayPal, and PayPal's been pretty involved in Node since before I joined them. And in fact, I joined to work on Kraken, which was a Node framework that we open sourced.
Todd Moore with IBM. Been around since the early days of the foundation, helping to put it together, and Denise and others, and are obviously very tied in with the Node.js community, and hopefully you stop by our booth. How's that?
I'm Colleen Evans from Microsoft. I recently joined the board. I replaced Gianluca Robolino, who was the original director when the foundation was formed. And if you just saw Sarah's talk, you heard why Microsoft loves Node, so I'm not going to say any more. She said it great.
Hi, I'm Brian McAllister. I'm with Groupon, and I actually represent a bunch of people on the board because I'm part of the silver class of members. I was involved with Node really early on, wandered away for a couple of years, and then came back when Groupon re-implemented its entire front end at Node. So.
Great, thank you. Well, let's start with the genesis of the foundation. What led up to its formation? Why was it needed? And who decided to start the foundation? Maybe Denise, do you want to kick things off with that question?
Sure. So you guys all know Michael Rogers, yeah? So I ran into Michael at a conference in California at Tim O'Reilly's offices, and he started asking me questions about CLAs. Was it important to have a CLA? Why a CLA would be a big deal to have? Because Joyent had just unilaterally decided to do away with the CLAs for individual contributors at Node. And surprisingly enough, that didn't make Node community members very happy. And so he was trying to sort through what to do, how can I help this community? And he invited me to a meeting, which was being convened by IBM in San Francisco a little bit later. And in that meeting, it was crystal clear to me, but not so much, it seemed, to representatives from Joyent, that the community was going to fork if something didn't change. It was very clear. And so we started working with the new CEO of Joyent. He was actually not, or he had just arrived, I think. He had just arrived. They went through 3 CEOs in 2 years or something like that. So this guy, Scott Hammond, was the last one, the one they have now. And he told me, the first day I met him, that like the day he arrived at Joyent, IBM was there saying, we got to talk about this Node thing.
Kind of, sort of,
yeah. So he was a little upset about that, because when you're a startup and the 6,000-pound gorilla shows up on your doorstep, you're not always sure what to do, right? He was just trying to make sense of what was happening to Joyent, the whole company, not just the Node piece of it. And so I agreed, because I've been involved in open source since the dawn of open source, to come and talk to him every week for a while, starting in about March of that year. And we had a weekly meeting where I talked to him about what open source was and gave him the crash course for CEOs in how to be involved in open source, what you can do, what you can't do, how to optimize your position, but still be generous to the technology. And what was really clear was that Scott wanted to do the right thing. He just needed to really understand it before he went to his board to try to recommend a solution. And so we were on the way to understanding, he and I and the group of advisory people that we got together, because we formed an advisory board really early. And really the purpose of that advisory board was to help Scott understand how to get to a foundation. We had just introduced him to the Linux Foundation when the IOJS split happened. And that definitely accelerated his consideration to get us back to a place where we could heal that fork. And personally, I'm really honored to have been part of that heal, because it's a rare thing. In the history of open source, there aren't that many high-value, high-velocity communities that fork and then come back together. So Node is unusual that way, and I'm really pleased that that is working out as well as it has. And a lot of that had to do with people like me and Todd helping Joyent understand how to play in this new arena and get credit for being the good guys. And they really were the good guys. I want to stress that they didn't have to make it happen this way. We could still be dealing with a fork, but they got it that that was important to fix. So.
Todd, maybe you can just expand on the other companies that sort of became founding members and that really wanted to work together to get through the fork and reunite the code.
Yeah, and it was a pretty interesting process, because what led up to that meeting that we talked about was Denise had talked about was essentially I had started working with our customer base who were using Node and were very concerned about it and wanted us to help out. We have a long history of being part of the open source communities and working in projects and bringing them out. And so a number of customers had approached us. So I started to work with some of the members of the community and found that most of them at that point were ready to go and fork and leave the project. That was concerning, since that wasn't what we wanted to see happen. So that was sort of the impetus to start working closely with Joyent, as well as bringing everybody together in a sort of neutral place and just having a frank dialogue about what the community needed and why everybody felt the way that they felt. And it was folks like NodeSource and Microsoft and others who came to this, and of course PayPal and StrongLoop, and we ended up becoming part of IBM actually after that. And so those folks, all had the same goal, that they were, making a good business out of what was happening with Node. They understood the importance of it. We had seen the uptick in the community. It was going much beyond just being something that people did on their weekends and nights. It was happening as an enterprise, very useful tool. Though many of the shops that we talked to in the enterprises, their CIOs didn't know that it was going on. Actually, it was kind of hidden at that point. But
not so much at PayPal.
not so much at PayPal, but a lot of big companies actually had no idea that their people were using so much Node.
Kind of like Linux in the early days.
Kind of like Linux. So it was good to see. So those companies came together. We worked over a very extended period with Scott, and Scott was great, and he really
was
came through on us. So
the truth was that because they didn't have a product based on Node, they were Node consumers, but they weren't selling a Node product. It was hard for them as a small startup to properly resource it for the kind of growth that Node was seeing. And he got that right away, and then taking the huge leap to step into open source was just a matter of education.
Yeah, and what we convinced Scott of was that just doing this alone wasn't going to make Node as successful as it possibly could. That it was plumbing that we all could share in and actually build and help develop. And I think, people were somewhat reluctant to believe that, help would show up, people would get engaged, it would live on. We could raise a number of companies to come together and form a foundation around it so that it had a life of its own for an extended period of time. And once we got through that, that was really the crucial part. And then, folks like ourselves at my company and others put resource in and expanded the contributor base, and that helped. And then others came, and it's that sort of snowball effect. And of course, the foundation helped a lot. We've grown 100% year to year in unique folks' IDs who have downloaded a Node. 5 million of us now. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
It's pretty good. It's getting up there to Java numbers.
Yeah.
So how does the foundation ensure that it doesn't get in the way of the success of the community and the project? How is it structured, and how does it encourage the project to continue to flourish?
So the board exists separate from the technical management of the project. So people here have probably heard phrases like TSC and CTC. they operate completely independently of the board, so we have no say in what happens technically, and that was by design, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't really want to make those decisions. I'm not as informed as everyone who's on the TSC. Beyond that, there are working groups underneath the TSC for various individual concerns from a technical standpoint, like if you want to get involved in the tracing working group or you want to get involved in the postmortem working group, those all exist, and those are sort of self-forming groups of engineers that want to work on a particular problem and then either make proposals or push those back into Node, and I think those end up in the Node EPS repo, which is the proposal repo for big things. The most notable one there that's been going on lately is the ES modules interop, which is a big hot topic these days.
So, Colleen, tell me a little bit about what the board does focus on then today. What are the things that it will, obviously the TSC runs independently, and that's by design. So what is the board focused on?
We're mainly focused on the business structure and the framework to make sure that all the technical groups can do what they need to do. I guess we smooth the way. And we look at things like licensing, like understanding the finances, making sure that everything runs smoothly and events like this can happen. I guess just the division that Charlie was talking about, where you have all the technical pieces in the TSC and CTC and the groups, and we're really on the business side, more the governance.
Great. And Brian, can you give some insight too in why a company like Groupon, is a little bit different than, a company, a vendor like IBM would join the foundation, and what you get out of it?
Yeah, so 3.5 years ago, we started transitioning, an awful lot of our applications over to Node, and we'd just gotten through that transition, and oh, here comes a fork. This is not good. And so it really is, we've made a strategic investment in Node and in our internal Node expertise and building out on it. And we want it to be as healthy, as effective, as both stable and rapid moving, despite that those sometimes conflict, as we can, so that we can continue to build on it. And that honestly is it. Like, a number of us, including myself, have a long history with open source and a strong foundation with a good set of legal policies and a good way of managing, the sort of responsibilities of a serious project. If we can contribute to that so that we can continue to invest and use Node, then we win. And that's really, that's brass tacks what it comes down to. And then there's also just the, we use it and we care about it. You have trouble watching something that you've just gotten really excited about go through a lot of pain. And so we just want to support the community and be able to keep using it.
Great. And Todd, maybe you are involved with several Linux Foundation projects and on several boards.
A number of them, yeah.
Beyond Node as well. And with so many different types of companies and involved, how do decisions get made at the board level, knowing that you have different companies coming to the table?
Yeah, so boards are really very interesting, and having been on a number of them, you see that in general they're unanimous in their decisions in the end. It's very, very rare that a board gets together and doesn't actually come up with a decision that everybody can live with.
Shall we say open source boards?
Open source boards.
Yeah.
But actually boards in general, business boards will often be that way too. The research suggests that as well too. So, it's a discussion process. We follow general rules of order. We make motions, we second them, we actually work through a dialogue and a discussion about them. And then after, we get to a consensus, we'll get to a vote. It's generally a fairly friendly process because we all have the same common goal, is to make Node great. And just because we represent companies, that's not how we actually represent ourselves on the board. We're here for the good of the foundation, right? That's our fiduciary responsibility to the foundation. So while I am from IBM, the point of view that I bring is what is best for the community, what will allow us to grow and do the best for our members who are here working with us.
So if the community wants to know more about what the board is doing, those decisions that you're talking about, how do they find that information?
It's usually really hard for us right now because we do a terrible job of, we've been working on that
We are
actually.
working on it,
Did you fix that?
It is posted, it is
I
updated.
saw it get posted. We had minutes
So if
actually
you go to the
up.
Node.js Foundation page, you can see the public notes from the last board meeting.
And we always have a public component to our meetings as well. There's a call-in number that's distributed publicly, and you can join. You can ask questions if you want.
How
Yeah.
does that get distributed?
I think it goes up on the webpage.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
so,
sure.
so things are available on the webpage. If you just go look up there, you'll find it. We're trying to get that all updated and keep that more updated.
And then-
People have pointed out to us that we weren't getting the minutes out as fast as we probably
And
should.
I think the
so.
public agenda goes up on Git, if I'm not mistaken. I think
Yeah,
he
there's a
checks
pull
everything
request that
into
goes
Git.
up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about the individual membership participation that Node Foundation has encouraged and set up.
Yeah, so most of the foundations that the Linux Foundation has created are what are called pay-to-play boards. And what that means is they use board participation as a way to raise money for the project, for all Linux Foundation projects. Well, not all, but almost all. So this one was set up that way. So companies at the highest level of sponsorship are spending $250,000 a year to support Node in addition to whatever engineering resources they're also lending to the project. And that puts us in a certain bucket. There are 3 buckets that you can buy into currently if you're a company and you happen to have that much money lying around. But I've been involved in open source since the very beginning of it, and I feel very strongly that you need to be able to, as a participant in any community project, earn the right to participate at any level of that project through your own work. And so the TSC has a voting seat on the board automatically by the bylaws. But effectively, at this point in Node, to be the chair of the TSC, it means that you have to probably be paid to work full-time on Node. It's not a requirement of the bylaws, but effectively, if you're going to put that much time into Node, it's probably the case that you work for a company. And so you represent a company in your presence, sort of. We wanted another way for people who maybe don't live Node quite that fully to have an opportunity to be part of the board. So every year, we will have a community election for one seat, one voting seat on the board from the membership at large. And in order to qualify for that, you have to first be a member. And there are different member levels, but it basically costs $25 a year. It's pretty cheap. It can cost nothing a year if that's a hardship for you. So there's a way to do that. And then there's a nomination period. You can self-nominate. You can write your platform, what it is that you hope to do while you're on the board. And there's an election, and the elected representative joins the board for 2 years. So every year we vote for one, and we always have 2 on the board. The first year, which was last year, we actually voted for 2 because we were bootstrapping. And the 2 are Ashley Williams and Feroz. What is Feroz's last name?
Very hard to pronounce.
Yeah, you guys know Feroz, right? So Feroz was the second place winner in the election. Therefore, he got a 1-year slot. But from now on, every new elected person will get 2 years, 2 full years. And that's because in our experience, it takes almost a year to really become an effective board member if you've never served on a board before. You have to get used to the rhythm of it and how things are done, and you have to figure out what you want to work on and how you're going to approach it. And it really, as he says, most boards are not very contentious. They're pretty collaborative. And it's often the case that community elected people come in with a kind of contentious platform, and we have to sort of affection train them to the point where we can all work together. But we feel very strongly as a board that this is an important component, especially for Node, because the community is so vibrant, and we really want to grow people into all levels of the product. And so there you go. That's the story.
Great. And Charlie, you've talked about one of the benefits that the foundation has been able to bring is stability to the project. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means to you and why that's been a positive outcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost exactly a year since the merge, right? Node 4 came out almost exactly a year ago, and so stability there has been pretty awesome. One of the first things that the TSC started working on post-merge was the LTS working group. And so, I don't know about everyone up here, but we run Node 4. Next month, we're going to run Node 6. So having that stability, where you know that the same people are going to be managing this release cycle, and that releases are going to essentially marinate for up to 6 to 8 months before you start running them in production is pretty great if you're a large company. So.
Great. And Brian, any other positive outcomes you've seen since the foundation started?
I'm sorry, I couldn't
Any
hear.
other positive developments or outcomes since the foundation
Positive
formed?
developments that have occurred since the foundation? Absolutely. I've seen that when we got involved, when everything was coming together, there was a huge amount of tension in the community around the fork, around the future. There were people talking about like, oh, well, that was fun. But unfortunately, you know, it's going the way of all the BSDs. Not that the BSDs are a problem. I love free BSD. The other ones, anyway. Anyway, on Node. And so the biggest positive thing is that the community has, in fact, really come back together. And, you know, as Denise was saying, that is not something that happens very often. You know, and pretty much everything else that has happened dwarfs in comparison to the importance of building a gelled community that is progressing at a fabulous rate, that is doing great things, that has the LTS releases, which we also are on the exact same schedule. And I really believe that moving responsibility, you know, the legal responsibility and the policy responsibility into a foundation is what has allowed for that to happen. And so, yes, that's by far the most important thing that's happened in the last year.
Great.
There was another important component of that, though, which was while the IOJS fork was active, the meticulous documenting of how to work together was so helpful when we created the foundation, because we just adopted that stuff whole cloth because it was so clear that that was how the engineers wanted to work. And open source is about that. It's about self-determination from the doers in the community. So to me, that the fact that the fork happened made that meticulous documentation possible.
Yeah, we had started that process, but it continued in full force with the IOJS.
It was really great, I thought.
And a lot of that's been preserved.
Oh, yeah. We just brought it right in.
Today. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of examples of that, I think.
Yeah.
Colleen, what are some of the current things that the board is focused on?
So there are a couple committees in the board, subcommittees. So there's a legal subcommittee, a marketing subcommittee, a finance subcommittee, and each of them kind of brings different things in on a regular rhythm of business. Other than that, you know, the TSC will raise issues to us. So based on what's being fed in from the technical side, you know, all the different problems that we're looking at or concerns that they have that they want board positioning on or help with. You know, we're looking into some of the inclusivity issues that have come up here. We were asked by the TSC and other groups to look at that. And I think there's another session going on right now that Ashley and Tracy are in talking about that. So those are kind of some of the big things. You know, some is the regular rhythm, others are issues that are brought to us by either other groups or board meetings where we raise issues that we discover ourselves.
Great. Are there any questions from the audience? Anyone want to ask any of our panelists about?
Oh, come on, somebody must have a question. Look, we don't get paid if you don't ask us any questions, so.
Wait a minute, you get paid?
Come on now.
You get paid?
We don't get paid.
We don't get paid, we're free.
Yes.
We pay, actually.
So Ryan was paid by Joyent for Node. I don't know how much, but he was. And then at a certain point, he decided that he wanted to work on other things. I think he lives in the Bay Area now again. He was in Brooklyn for a while, then he was back in the Bay. He is primarily working on, I think, machine learning stuff. So
He wanted to sell his interest in it.
yeah, he you know, saw the opportunity to bring it into a company like Joyent. I mean, this was a long time ago. This was 2009, late 2009. So Node had existed for less than a year, I think, at the point that he started at Joyent, and Joyent took over ownership of the project. It was right before the first NodeConf, so actually it was 2010. And yeah, I mean, it was, you know, something that he wanted to do, and then I think over time he decided he didn't want to work on the project anymore, which is why something like the foundation, something like the TSC is so important, because you can't really expect that one person is going to work on a project for their entire life. I mean, some people do, but it's not the average.
The exception.
Right.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What you generally see is that we are quite reluctant to adopt new things. Like several reasons behind
You're a bank.
we are back.
Yeah.
Feel like a risk compliance.
Sure.
So I think so no matter like how exciting this is inside the organization, it is always a very, very hard sell. So so my question is that as Node Foundation, do you also see this as your, let's say, part of the vision to promote this inside like more traditional organizations?
Sure. So we publish case studies.
Well, yeah, let's try to restate the question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. The
Potentially?
the
Yes.
question was for companies that are change resistant. He's mentioning banks. How do you convince management, and is the foundation doing anything to support that?
I would like to correct that. We are not change resistant, but we are very careful about
Careful rather than change resistant is his fix there. So I work for a bank, right? I work for PayPal. And there's a lot of recordings of Bill Scott, who's the executive that brought Node into PayPal. And there's also case studies that have been published about that effort. And one of the things that we do is sponsor the foundation to put up new, fresh case studies about, sort of excellent Node clients who are really seeing a quantifiable benefit. And in our case, at PayPal, we used to front end our product in Java. And when Bill came in, he came from Netflix, where they were using Node. And he saw an opportunity to teach the very change-resistant and careful engineers at PayPal that Node could really accelerate the velocity on the front ending that they do, and even into the middleware part of the stack. And what he did, and he's from Texas, he's a very humble guy, he very famously denied that he had ambitions to run this in production. So he went through a whole series of meetings where people were trying to stop him with his very small team. He had 15 people that were prototyping the same front end that the 45 Java engineers were trying to write, but they were making a lot more progress on the Node side because it's easier, right? And every time he got into a meeting where somebody would say, "What are you doing?" he'd say, "You don't have to worry, we're just prototyping. We're just prototyping, don't worry about it." Right? And because he knew that at some point, those Java engineers would get frustrated because the Node guys were getting there so much faster, and they would start agitating from inside. So when the flip happened and Node was our new production front end, he acted surprised. I'm the most surprised that this is happening. But of course, he knew the whole time that that's what was going to happen. So there's that. Having a champion inside can be a very valuable thing. But you will find case studies on the website.
Yeah. And a lot of us go out and talk about this. So, 2 or 3 times a week, it seems, I talk to a client who has these kinds of questions and is looking for examples and how to get going. And that's how I learned a lot of how CIOs don't know the fact how much of Node is actually happening in their shop. When you sit down with a major airline and you've got his CTO and the CIO and you're having a chat and you say, "Yeah, you probably got some of this going on." And he goes, "Oh no, that's not on the approved list." And then the CTO looks like this and he's, goes, "Well, we have to have a chat." And then, we go down the line.
So it can be done. It's been done, and you could champion it in your company, and we would give you some help if you wanted it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's definitely an area that the board has known has been a problem, and they've put resources and energy into trying to make it more well known that Node is enterprise ready and getting deeper into mainstream enterprises.
No.
Any other questions?
There's one way in the back.
I'm never gonna. Yes.
That was a question about Google and the V8 engine.
I think I can probably it's a general question. It's probably better answered by the TSC folks, but how is the Node project working with the V8 team and other external organizations. TC39 would be a good example as well. Stability has been a major boon to that, right? I mean, the idea that the project itself wasn't healthy is going to be a turnoff to a team like V8. And I know for a fact that the amount that's been going on between V8 and Node has improved a lot. You probably want to ask Rod or some of the other TSC members to get more of an answer, but what the foundation has done to bring stability to the project has really improved those relations quite a bit.
And Google is a member as well.
Yeah, Google's a
Yeah.
member.
And that's a more recent development.
One of the first things that we did in setting up the foundation was scan the code, because there was a rumor, which I actually heard from Google, that there was some code in there that was licensed under the AGPL, which they have chosen not to mix with. And we were able to do a scan using the foundation's resources to prove that that wasn't the case, and then it was easier for Google to come in.
Yeah.
I saw another hand, yep.
I have, yes. Well, it might be a controversial answer given the mood here this week, but I spend a lot of time in open source communities, and I serve on a lot of boards. And actually, this community is more inclusive than any other community that I know of, in the sense that there are people that are leading all walks of life and making life choices and being, visible in their choices more prevalently in this community than any other community that I'm involved with. Yeah. So we have work to do. There's definitely work to do on inclusion here, so that everybody feels comfortable and wants to participate. But for whatever it's worth, the project has already attracted a very large population compared to all other projects that I work on, of people who want that and are living that way. And I think that's a strength of this community. It makes it modern. So when I look at some of the things that the IOJS community wanted in the way that they were working, were closer to open than open source. Open is the idea that there are too many constraints in open source, too many barriers to entry. It'd be nice if it was more frictionless. And we adopted some of those ideas because, again, it's a fresh community that's trying to revolutionize how they work and optimize for contribution, rather than some of the other possible optimization dials you can turn in an open source project. And that's really exciting to me. My peers, people that have been involved in open source as long as I have, many of them are having a hard time with the kids, the wave of kids. And I actually gave a talk at OSCON in North America in May that you can probably find online, where I talked about sustainability of open source and the things I think we need to pay attention to now, 20 years in, that might bite us going forward, because the new wave of people are, for instance, fatigued about the licensing conversation. They don't want to have that conversation anymore. And so often they will choose no license rather than have to figure that out. That's dangerous, and my advice to the larger open source community was we have to stop arguing and help people figure out which license to pick rather than arguing over it, because it's turning them off and they're choosing not to license. Anyway, you can find that talk, and it's generic, it's not just about Node.
But being friendly is probably the core value that I think we value the most, right? Going the extra mile when you're doing your code reviews to help and mentor people along, especially the new folks that come in. Even if it takes you multiple cycles through it, just the patience and the understanding and helping is the value that I'd say that we need to espouse the most.
No, I totally agree.
And I think that's the ethos of the larger JavaScript community. I mean, you look back at, talk about lore and history of Node, right? Node was announced at JSConf EU 2009, and that's really when most people caught its attention. It's when it caught my attention. And the larger JavaScript community that focuses a lot more on front end, I think, gets a lot of people that don't have traditional computer science backgrounds. If you're going to be interested in design and front end, you don't necessarily need to have a PhD in distributed systems. And that, I think, is what drives that people from more diverse backgrounds to come into JavaScript-based projects. Yeah. And we benefit from that as Node.
It's a beautiful thing. And I hope that the discourse that's happening around inclusivity we all need to take a step back and a nice big breath and go, but really look around us for a minute and then start working on it. You know, it's actually better than you think it is.
And growing the population of other folks takes a while. I'm involved in OpenStack. I sit on that board as well too. We started out with a very small fraction of the population that was, from women or other groups, and we've grown that into double digits. And it's taken considerable effort to go and do that, but we've set up the opportunities, we've done the outreach, we've actually enlisted folks from the outside to come in and help us figure out what we needed to do. And that's the kinds of things that we're doing here. So, you can do it, it doesn't happen overnight. You don't legislate it. You've got to get folks involved and engaged and show that you are that friendly place to come and be part of, and they come.
Build it, rather than trying for a revolution, because revolutions don't, that's not how it's done.
Yeah.
It takes a long time.
So along those lines, Denise had mentioned there's a public component to all of our board meetings, and I just really encourage people to dial in for that if you have questions, suggestions, concerns. And I'd almost like to turn your question around. What do you in the community think is special or different about this open source foundation? Are there things that you have concerns about? Because we're hearing a lot of good questions, but I think your opinion would really be valuable, some feedback. Yeah.
What I really love about the community, especially now, is how fast moving it is, how open it is to new members, how easy it actually is to ask questions. And for instance, in IRC back in the days, like if you had one bad question, then they bad from the chat, they didn't able to
Yeah.
With Node, it isn't like that.
Yeah.
Could everybody hear?
So yeah, he's saying that he really likes the ease of getting started and asking questions, and that you're allowed to be stupid. You don't have to always know everything. Yeah, is that a good precis? Yeah. Good.
Anybody else?
Anyone else have any thoughts?
We got
on
a
that?
little time still.
Yeah.
You're all still sitting here. There must be some expectation.
Or questions?
People to get up and leave us, I guess.
Yeah, waiting.
No, there were people who got up and left.
Yeah.
No? What was your favorite talk? We're almost done with the meeting now. Who can tell me what their favorite talk was? It's okay. This one? No, come on. There's probably another one you liked. I saw Sarah in the last hour. She was pretty great. That was it with the bobble-headed Satya. It's a pretty great little deal. The machine learning guy? I went to NodeConf EU last summer, just before I got elected, and there was a guy who was showing how many processes you could spawn, and it was like, 1,024 videos going at the same time. It was kind of amazing. I mean, it was a cheap trick because it's not something you would ever do, but it was interesting. And the guy who makes the hex-shaped stickers, that was a pretty cool one.
I think I like the talk,
The Jasnal one?
about the event loop, because one of the most mysterious things
The event loop, the event loop keynote. Did any of you guys watch that?
From Bert, yeah.
He's saying it. Yeah, you liked it too.
I liked it too. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I tweeted about it. I thought it was good. Yeah.
He's saying that's one of the most mysterious things. So it was nice to see Bert. Bert's great too. Did he plug Swift in it?
No.
He's been talking about Swift a lot lately.
Yeah.
Swift is the new development environment for IOJS that they open source, Apple open source. He's bullish on it. Anybody else? Okay. There's always one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about certification? It's a different kind. But.
So the question
Sure.
is around the foundation being involved in efforts like Node School and training and teaching for Node,
Do you want to talk about it?
and how involved it is in supporting those efforts.
Yeah, so it's important that people be able to learn, and we're definitely all supportive of that. But I was actually suggesting that we turn your question just a little bit and have Todd talk a little bit about the certification working group, which is more about the modules and whether they're going to break things, which is another important piece. We're sort of more working on that level because the truth is those opportunities to learn are proliferating pretty quickly. We did just pay for almost a year of Node Live events, which are little conferences in places where there isn't already a Node conference to try to, plumb the new areas. And it turns out that China was a big win. They're very excited to go back to China. But anyway.
Well, yeah, you can go to China, and any event you go to, you'll have 2,000 people show up. So it's kind of interesting that way. But,
certification.
Go ahead.
No,
go ahead. You're doing fine. You're doing fine. That's
it's
okay.
your working group.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
This isn't what our meetings are like.
Yeah. I worked on Java. Java had a certification stack. The reason Java had a certification stack was so it would not fragment. The split that happened between IOJS and Node.js was fragmentation that we were trying to repair. So one of the first conversations we had was about packages and how to do something about the quality of packages, and so that consumers could know with confidence that a given package was actually going to perform as advertised and was fresh and was all those things, right? And we continue to sort of noodle on that as a board.
Yeah.
So there's a working group looking at that question, for instance, so that when people are learning, there are fewer things to run into that are out of their control.
Yeah, one of the first problems people have is there's 300,000 modules out there.
Yeah.
What do I pick, right? Do I know the quality of it? And helping people get through that and moving that along so that you as a developer know what you can count on is really important. So hence why the importance of going and doing that. Java had some good things. Obviously, they were looking to have multiple independent implementations. So they had TCKs, test cases, essentially, to go with it, a specification, and a reference implementation. We want everybody to use the same node.
We do.
Right? So we don't need the spec. We can put the spec aside. The code is the de facto standard and specification for this. And now we need to improve the stability of the code base, hence all the testing that we've done, and of course the stability of the module system and the modules that we have, and the security of all of that, because that's very important. If we have weak security, then we'll eventually fail as well too. So all those things are important, and all of those things are things that we worry about.
And to be clear, those are things that the TSC is working on mostly.
Yeah.
But we deal with any upstream issue that they ask us to look into.
Yeah.
So. Yes.
Yeah, with your community growing like 2x each year, what about thoughts about like security in the sense of like new users get on board, they type in npm install something, and have yet to see somebody deploy a virus on npm, but npm is a private company and they have no real like open governance about what packages they retract. But in a sense, I could maybe find a sub-package of Express, somehow manipulate that, and then that would be deployed to about 2 million users, because next year there will be 10 million Node.js users. What's the thought about that?
You got something on that?
So the TSC is talking to folks about the registry. Obviously, there is concerns. I've heard it from a lot of different people. That is something that's outside of our scope as a foundation. But there are a lot of efforts out there. I think the Node Security Project's a good one that finds a number of vulnerabilities and reports them. There are other efforts out there to secure all of it, but at the end of the day, it is sort of a bazaar. One of my favorite quotes about this is that by depending on something, you are implicitly saying that you will eventually maintain it one day if the maintainer goes away. There's no way around that. Even if we did run the registry, there's no way that one organization could maintain 3 million or 300,000 different modules. It's just not the way that it would work. So it's a challenging question, but it's definitely something that's being thought about. It's one of the big questions that we talk about in meetings and we talk about from the TSC and hear from them about. I mean, that's true, but I mean, not everything has a standard library, right? I mean, like, not every other language has a standard library. Also, a lot of other things. Take Go, for example. Go is a great use case here. Go has no package manager, right? Go, you can depend directly on URLs from GitHub, and the same problem arises, right? Like in Node, imagine that you could just put in a GitHub URL and you could get it. You'd still have that same problem, right? It would no longer be a registry problem because there wouldn't be a registry, but the meta problem still exists. And that is if you're writing software, you sort of have to go out and evaluate, and I would love to see an open effort to make that better, but that's not something that I've seen beyond a few small projects like Node Security. I think David DM does it. I know Sync or SNCC is another private company that does it for security purposes.
Back in the day, open source got a lot of criticism from the traditional software community about the potential for lack of security. And I think, 20 years on, projects like Apache have been able to prove that they're actually much better at responding to security issues than the average proprietary project. And we're starting to see proprietary projects try to copy some of the methodologies that open source uses to deal with their issues around some of this patching that happens, right?
And in general, the visibility of the code base
Yeah.
means that more eyes are on it. And
inspection of the code base is key to this being better. You're right, it's a potential vulnerability of this architecture, but we're not the only community that's got the vulnerability. We'll definitely all be collectively trying to figure out what to do about it. I can think of a few possible ways to attack that problem, but I'm not the TSC, so, but I'm sure that the security group is thinking about it all the time. They have to be.
what do we do for the new user coming in? How do you?
No, I get his onboarding question to explain all of that stuff.
Well, the new user onboarding problem has been a pretty common thing, right? Like you go and you look and you use downloads as a proxy for quality, right? And that's worked relatively well. I don't see many people who do a search, take the thing that's the most downloaded, and regret that decision for the most part. So the new user, their search problem, they can get better at it over time. They can get more nuanced. Okay, I'm going to read the code. Okay, this has the badges for the CI is there, or the badges that all its dependencies are up to date. But downloads as a proxy to quality and value is pretty good. And I think that's why new users keep coming on, right? I mean, if this was a challenge for them, then the community wouldn't be doubling year over year.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what we did at PayPal was we created a sort of bumper room with our framework with Kraken. So we give the individual developers some choice in what they want to use, but they have to live within our framework because that supplies us with some certainty that the choices they're making can't be too disastrous to us.
That's a great example because in Kraken there's a middleware that it does a lot of web security things, right? So take Express. Express is stable. Doug's going to give a talk on it later today. It has no known vulnerabilities that I'm aware of, but it's still a web server, right? So if you don't use this other middlewares that say set your content security policy or other web HTTP things, you're by definition letting people write insecure web servers. So it's a challenging problem, but at the end of the day, it's again, downloads as a proxy to value. People will figure it out and search for it. And then, your average novice is not necessarily looking to write the most secure enterprise-focused web server. They're probably making sure that they can write anything at all for the first time, and so they'll work through that. And their third or fourth project is where they'll start to pay attention to that stuff.
We got time for like one more question if you come up quick.
for the Node.js and
So let me tell you what happened with Apache. He's asking if the flavor, the open source flavor of Node is going to disappear now that big companies care. So let me tell you what happened with Apache. So Apache was a project for 5 years before the foundation was formed. And in that, it started with 13 guys that were just patching because they were hobbyists. And by the time we formed the foundation, they were all suing each other because they all had business interests. They were small companies, but they were already at each other's throats. And setting up the foundation was a way to kind of cause a ceasefire to happen so that the project could go forward. What they said at the time was, God, we wish we could just get back to how it was when we started and we were all friends and we were working in the same direction. And the Apache Software Foundation proved to be very successful at helping the web server become super successful. IBM wrapped it as web server. It became the de facto standard in web servers. At one point, almost 85% of all web traffic ran through an Apache server. But if you went and talked to the guys that wrote it, they feel like they're in a community. They love each other. They go on vacations together. They hang out together. They work at all different companies. They've changed jobs over the years. They help each other get jobs. They're all friends still. And so it might be a magic ingredient of open source that you get to have both. It does change a little bit because money flows in, and inevitably that changes things a little bit. But I think a lot of the flavor you're looking for sticks around.
Yeah, and in the transition to cloud, it has become a language that everybody wants to use. And so it's not a dependency for the business, but it's something that our customers just expect. And we see that more and more and more. So it just makes sense to be part of it and foster it as a community and do it all together, because it's not something we're individually making money on per se. It's something that we're enabling so everybody else who wants to go and build something can go make money and build an ecosystem around and do.
And buy more computers.
And buy more computers and airtime and whatever else. But eventually, yes, there is a flow of money, but it doesn't get in the way of the community because we're not individually trying to tweak it in some way that's going to pull us all apart and do dumb things. We're here to just see it grow and build the ecosystem.
For PayPal, it was just about time to market. It's definitely not our core competency to control a language, right?
I just plus one what Todd said. We want to enable. That's why we're here. You know, So we want the community to grow. We want it to be healthy. We want to enable.
So that was a great last question.
Yeah, it was. It was almost a nice way to wrap things up. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. And as Colleen and others have mentioned, there is the public portion of that board meeting, and feel free to drop in whenever you want and keep the conversation, the dialogue going.
Go get your individual membership, too.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.